And hello, welcome to the Social Justice Forums. I am your host, Daren, Jaime. We thank you for joining us. If you're asking the question, what is this show all about? We bring you a forum discussing and providing a deeper understanding of the issues and inequities that many communities face. From systemic inequalities to pressing social problems, our guests provide multiple perspectives and insights to help us better understand and address the challenges. So we invite you to stay connected to us. The Social Justice Forum starts now. And we are back. Our guest today is an acclaimed historian whose latest book, called Freeman's Challenge, analyzes a dark chapter of American history, shedding light on the enduring impact of profit-driven prisons and the fight against racial injustice. Here now is the Dillon Professor of American History at Harvard University, Bernstein. And thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
You know, it comes at a time where we as America are just going through it right now. But in order to know where you're going, I always talk about you got to talk about where you come from. And when we talk about this issue of prison, we're presently dealing with mass incarceration, presently dealing with the prison to pipeline system. And as I like to tell people, these things didn't happen overnight. It happened over time.
That's right. That's exactly right. In order to understand where we are, we have to understand where we've been, how we got here, and who brought us here. It didn't happen by magic. It was not inevitable in any way. So what my book does is it brings us into the actual invention of profit-driven incarceration. This is a history that's just under 200 years old. But it's not 1,000 years old, it's not 10,000 years old. This is relatively recent. It was invented by individuals who you will meet in Freeman's Challenge. So what I'm trying to do in this book is show us how this dastardly, diabolical idea started, this idea that one person can and should profit off another person's incarceration, that one person's incarceration should benefit a private corporation or a state. Why should that happen? That's a very strange idea. And by showing the individuals who actually came up with that idea and the impact of that idea on William Freeman, who was a teenager who resisted and fought back against prison for profit at its source, what I'm hoping it will do is make us look at the present moment in a new way and say, yes, these ideas that are very second nature to us, that a prison, it can, you know, on the one hand, prison is bad, but on the other hand, it creates jobs. That's actually a bizarre idea. Right. Why should anybody benefit from a prison? Let's actually hear the bizarreness of that idea.
Well, you know, the other part about the bizarreness is that I tell people is that they don't always understand that when it comes to prisons and you have populations, smaller cities who have prison populations are now able to use those prisoners as a part of the population when it comes to trying to obtain funding or making their case for certain things.
That's right.
But the reality is you're not from here. You're just being housed here. But another way that the prison system is actually benefiting corporations, governments, and far from the people.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about your book, because as you talk about this here, there is social motivation through incarceration. For what you can tell us, what were the social motivations for this prison industrial system?
Well, it was begun in 1816, and it was begun in a very specific place. It was begun in Auburn, New York, which was at the time a tiny little village in the Finger Lakes area, not far from Syracuse, where I know you live.
Right.
And it was invented by a group of white entrepreneurs. And they basically had this idea that if they could win a state contract to build a prison, that state contract, the money, would enable them to transform their village into a city. And it would benefit them personally as businessmen and also as people who had an interest in real estate. It would increase the real estate of Auburn. So at the time, the state was offering $20,000 to build a new prison. Now, $20,000 is the equivalent, in 1816, is the equivalent of about $500,000 today. And Auburn at the time was a tiny little village of about 2,000 people. So you can imagine if you take a village of 2,000 people and you flood it with $500,000 all of a sudden, with more money to come into in perpetuity, that is going to completely transform the area. It's going to transform the town. Now, to us, that's obvious. But the only reason it's obvious is because these white entrepreneurs invented this strategy for sucking money out of the state, putting it into a prison, and then using that money to build industries in the prison and around the prison. And then they had a second diabolical idea, which was to actually build the prison around factories. They built factories into the prison. They built the prison by the banks of a river for the purpose of capturing water power to power these factories. So the idea from the beginning was that not only would they be sucking money out of the state, they would also be sucking labor out of incarcerated people for the purpose of benefiting private corporations. So this was a revolutionary idea. And one thing that I want to say that's really important was that the founders of the Auburn State Prison had no interest whatsoever in reforming people. The purpose was not rehabilitation. That was completely off the table. They did not care.
That's a term we heard later on.
Yeah,
but
that's
there was
exactly
no,
right.
There was no original purpose.
Nothing. And they also, believe it or not, did not care about punishment. They were not interested in punishing prisoners because punishment, and this is very counterintuitive, punishment was actually understood as a benefit because punishment could provoke penitence. Punishment could help make a prisoner a better person, in theory. But this was a system that was much more akin to slavery. And let's remember that in 1816, New York State was still a slave state. New York State still enslaved people. And so this profit-driven prison, the Auburn State Prison, was being built on the model of slavery. Part of the concept of slavery is that the enslaved person has no right to benefit from their own labor. And so this was the model for labor in the Auburn State Prison. This is what became known as the Auburn System. And the Auburn System, created in New York State, invented by a bunch of white entrepreneurs, then spread throughout the Northeast, it spread throughout the United States, it spread throughout the world. And today, some of the most notorious prisons in the United States to this day were built absolutely consciously, explicitly modeled on the Auburn system. So we can think about San Quentin, for example, Angola, Parchman, Sing Sing. These were all built on the Auburn system.
Let me talk to you about William Freeman, because that's main character in your book here.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about William Freeman, introduce us to him.
Yeah.
Why is he so important, and what's the significance with him to the prison system?
So William Freeman happened to be born in Auburn, New York, so he grew up next to the Auburn State Prison. And he was an African-American and also Native American teenager. So he grew up, he was also part of the most prominent black family in town. His grandparents, Harry and Kate, who were the people who chose the name Freeman, which tells you everything you need to know about what they valued, how they thought of themselves, who they considered themselves to be, who they wanted to be. Harry and Kate Freeman had partially built Auburn. And while they were building white Auburn, they also built black Auburn. They built a community that was known as New Guinea. And William Freeman grew up in this prominent black family, a beloved black family, in this vibrant community of New Guinea that was full of social life and religion and politics. It was a good place to grow up. But his life changed forever in 1840. He was 15 years old, and he was accused of stealing a horse. There was no evidence against him, but that didn't matter. He was tried, he was convicted, and he was sentenced to 5 years hard labor in the Auburn State Prison. Now, William Freeman had been free-born. He had been born in 1824. He was always free. His grandparents had been enslaved. His father had been enslaved. They had all become free. They had all named themselves Freemen. And here he was, imprisoned for a crime that he swore he did not commit, forced to labor for no wages at all, to benefit only other people, not to benefit himself in any way. And William Freeman resisted. He resisted from the moment he got into the Auburn State Prison. He resisted first with words, and then later he resisted legally. He tried to use the law to recover what he saw as his right to wages. And then finally he resorted to violence. And that is what the book is about. The book is about how Freeman challenged the Auburn State Prison, how he challenged prison for profit at its root. And what happened next?
We know. Let's talk about it for a minute. Harriet Tubman.
Harriet Tubman.
Frederick Douglass.
Frederick Douglass.
Very instrumental in what we're talking about right here.
Yeah, yeah.
How?
Yeah, so in different ways. So when William Freeman made this challenge to the Auburn State Prison, at first he was laughed at, and at first he was dismissed. And that was when he was using words. That's when he was trying to use the law. He also, when he resisted within the Auburn State Prison, he became the victim of terrible violence. Guards beat him horribly. They whipped him, and they also waterboarded him. The Auburn State Prison actually invented a new form of waterboarding. And I have a lot of images in the book, and a couple of the images show this horrible waterboarding machine that they invented. I have two images, one that shows how they thought about the waterboarding machine, the ones who invented it, as this nice thing, and how it really affected people. So Freeman, in his challenge, he became a victim of terrible violence. But at this point, he hadn't scared anybody. But then when he committed violence, when he committed the murder that is in the title of the book is Freeman's Challenge, the murder that shook America's original prison for profit. So you know from the very beginning of the book that he is going to commit a murder. Once he committed that murder, then white people got really frightened. And white people could no longer dismiss him. They could no longer laugh him off. They had to deal with him in one way or another. And that's when a lot of very prominent people got involved. And one of the people who had to deal with the fallout was Frederick Douglass, because Frederick Douglass was arguably the most prominent abolitionist in New York State at the time. And he had to manage the terror that was being unleashed by William Freeman, along with a lot of other abolitionists, people like William Wells Brown. And what they decided to do collectively was not defend him. They did not defend William Freeman. They did not excuse him. Instead, what they did was Freeman's story got twisted. His story got horribly twisted. There was a very big, very spectacular trial that made national headlines. Celebrities got involved in the trial, white celebrities. And then people like Frederick Douglass had to deal with the fallout. And the way they decided to do it was by telling their own stories. And telling their own stories in Auburn. So Auburn, before William Freeman's trial, was not an important site for black abolitionists. It was somewhat important for white abolitionists, but black abolitionists were kind of skipping over it. There was a lecture circuit. Auburn was not important on the lecture circuit. The moment Freeman goes to trial, Auburn becomes crucial to abolitionist lecture circuits. And people like Frederick Douglass come back multiple times. He never came to Auburn before. But immediately after, he starts coming and returning multiple times to Auburn to tell his own story from his own perspective. And this is a counterweight to the terrible racist stories that white people were telling about William Freeman. And in comes Frederick Douglass telling his own story. One of his autobiographies, My Bondage and My Freedom, was originally published in Auburn. So Auburn became a center for abolitionism. And you asked about Harriet Tubman, shall I?
Yes. Well, before I come back to Harriet, I'll come back to Harriet Tubman in a minute. I want to go forward now,
Sure,
right?
sure.
Because we know some history. We've got in and you've done a great job in detailing. I want to talk about what are the similarities from Freeman's Challenge to today?
Yeah.
Are there a lot?
Yeah.
From your perspective?
Yeah, so many. What a lot of people have told me is that the book is very uncannily familiar. That a lot of what I am describing is completely relevant now. And actually, one person I know who is formerly incarcerated told me that the experience I described of Freeman's incarceration touched him, that it resonated with his own experience. And on the one hand, I was very glad that I got it right. On the other hand, I was so sorry that I got it right.
Right.
That this is still the experience, this crushing experience of being incarcerated that William Freeman had is very similar to the experience of being incarcerated today. So some of the similarities, specifically in New York State, are that Freeman had no choice about whether to work. Today, incarcerated people, if they are told to work in New York State, they have no choice. They have to work. And this is something that's actually being addressed right now by a very important act called the No Slavery in New York Act, which is being considered by the New York State legislation right now. And the purpose of the No Slavery in New York Act is to make illegal exactly what Freeman was challenging. Freeman was challenging the fact that he was forced to work. The No Slavery in New York Act challenges the fact that incarcerated New Yorkers are still forced to work. So there's a chance that the story in Freeman's Challenge could end, and it could end this year if the legislature passes the bill. The Senate already passed it, and now it's going to the Assembly.
Yeah. And for yourself, the thought that we're still in 2024 talking about what transpired in the 1800s, what kind of feeling does that give you?
Well, it keeps me in business as a historian.
Right.
But no, it's very upsetting. It's deeply upsetting that this story that took place 170 years ago is completely contemporary. And people who have never been incarcerated have told me how uncanny it is, how familiar it feels. People who've been incarcerated say the same, and it's enormously sad. Enough. Let's end slavery in New York State. Let's end slavery everywhere. It is time to end the profit motive in incarceration. It is time to say incarceration should have nothing to do with profiteering.
Right. And when we look at American labor, and when we look at profiteering through American labor, incarceration has served as a huge means to an end there.
Absolutely.
For yourself, the conversations that you're having after writing the book, what are you hearing from people? Are you hearing a sense that, well, it is what it is? Or are you hearing more of, no, there's something that we need to do about this?
Yeah. Well, of course, there's a very large movement to end prison, or at least to end prison as we know it, to end profit-driven prison. And so a lot of people have told me that the book has made them think about incarceration in a new way. I want to denaturalize some ideas. I want us to hear the weirdness of some of the ideas that we've inherited, and to understand, to make the familiar strange. One really good way to make the familiar strange is to look at the origins and to know that these ideas were invented by highly flawed individuals, and in some case, outright evil individuals who came up with these ideas that now we kind of take for granted. So, like I mentioned before, the idea that a reasonable justification for building a prison is that it will create jobs. That is actually a completely unreasonable justification. And I want this book to enable people to hear that weirdness. And I also want people to hear Freeman's challenge. Freeman was silenced during his lifetime. People worked very hard to silence William Freeman. And it is time to hear his challenge, and it is time to finally enact what he wanted, and especially right here in New York State.
You talk about Freeman being silenced. There's so many people who are silenced right now just by having to engage in forced labor. So many people are silenced right now because they don't have the opportunity, and they've, been the other side of that prison, that mass incarceration pipeline. As you look right now and you look around and you see what's happening, talk to me about future projections, because as we talk about your book, right, it really talks about history, but then it also speaks to the present and potentially the future. What kind of future projections could we have if we take Freeman's challenge seriously?
Well, we could end forced labor in New York. There's also a twin act, or a paired act, called the Fairness and Opportunity Act, which is also coming up before the New York State Legislature. And this is another act that directly speaks to Freeman's challenge. Freeman wanted to be paid for his work, and he also wanted the right to choose not to work. But the reason he wanted to be paid for his work, he didn't just want the money for its own sake, although there's nothing wrong with wanting wages for the work you do. But what he really wanted was a fair wage that would enable him to build a life, a fair wage that would enable him to have a modicum of security, to just build a livable life. That's what William Freeman really wanted for himself. And the Fairness and Opportunity Act, that is the whole point of the Fairness and Opportunity Act, that people who choose to work in prisons, because nobody is trying to end opportunities for job training and the good reasons a person might want to work, the good reasons a non-incarcerated person or an incarcerated person might want to work. Nobody's trying to end that. But the Fairness and Opportunity Act, what it stipulates is that, first of all, incarcerated workers will have fair wages, and that also they will have opportunities to do things with their money that people who are not incarcerated take for granted. Things like save their money and earn interest on their money. You or I, we can put our money in a bank and we can earn interest on it. Incarcerated people can't do that. Why not? Why shouldn't they have that right too? That's what the Fairness and Opportunity Act addresses. So you asked me to project for the future. I say these acts are going to pass. They're going to pass, especially if New Yorkers support them, if New Yorkers let the Assembly and the Senate know that we support these measures. The No Slavery Act No Slavery in New York Act and the Fairness and Opportunity Act, they will pass, and they will greatly improve the lives of incarcerated New Yorkers.
Now, Dr. Bernstein, I got to ask a question, because in order for it to pass, people have to be aware, right? A lot of what we talk about on this show is bringing awareness to the issues that matter the most. Do you find that when it comes to this particular issue, that people are very aware of what's going on? I mean, I know they're aware that, we talk about mass incarceration, we talk about those things, but in a drawdown sense, to really know what's going on, how aware are people?
Yeah, well, people are very aware of certain things and very unaware of other things. So people tend to be at least people in my circle and probably in your circle too, people tend to be very aware of mass incarceration, of mass racialized incarceration, of the role of racism in mass incarceration. People are very aware of that. But they have some misunderstandings about some aspects of this history that are really important. One thing that people tend to get wrong is they tend to think that prison for profit originated in the South and it originated after the Civil War. So we tend to think that it started with the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution very famously outlaws forced labor, quote, except as a punishment for crime, unquote. And in a lot of popular understanding, a lot of people think that what that means was that as the South was forced to liberate enslaved people, white Southerners came up with a new form of slavery, slavery by another name, which was a way to re-enslave African Americans after the Civil War. Now, it is absolutely true that profit-driven prison originated in the context of abolition, but it originated in the context of Northern abolition, not Southern abolition. It originated 50 years before the Civil War. And so if we start the story with the South, if we start the story with the Civil War,
we're not telling the right story, not
we're
telling the whole story.
We're not telling the whole story. It is the right story.
Right.
But we're starting the story in the middle. And the problem with starting the story in the middle is that when we do that, we're letting the North off the hook. And what I want to do in Freeman's Challenge is put the North back on the hook.
Yeah. So for people who want to get a copy of the book, find out more about it, what do they do?
Well, they can go to any online bookstore, or they can go to their local bookstore and ask for it. If it's not in stock, it can be ordered. So Freeman's Challenge, The Murder That Shook America's Original Prison for Profit, available either right there or by order wherever books are sold.
What is your hope that, and I mean, it sounds like a very basic question, but it's a very real question. What is your hope and takeaway after people have this experience of reading your book?
Well, I hope they are inspired in certain ways by William Freeman. I hope that they are inspired that this was a teenager who resisted the mighty Auburn system. He resisted prison for profit at its root. And if he resisted, we can find ways to resist too. And he tried a lot of ways to resist before he resorted to violence. And I hope people take inspiration from the ways he resisted early on before he resorted to violence. If he was this courageous, we can be that courageous too.
You did a lot of research.
I did.
And talk to us a little bit about, before we go, the research process and some of your sources. How were you able to come about?
Yeah. Well, it took me 9 years to write this book.
Wow.
It was a long process. I did a lot of archival research. I also went to the Auburn prison. So the Auburn State Prison still exists. It is now called the Auburn Correctional Facility. It houses approximately 1,300 men who work, and it is the oldest maximum security prison that is continually operating in the United States. And it is the site where all New York State license plates are made. All of them are made in the Auburn prison. So if you see a car today and it has a New York State license plate, you know that it was made by a man in the Auburn prison who was literally walking in William Freeman's footsteps. So as part of the research for this book, I went to what is now the Auburn Correctional Facility. I went there and I met men who make license plates. And I met men who are incarcerated there. And that was a really important part of this research.
Yeah. Dr. Bernstein, it's been great having you talking about this. Got to bring you back again. It's a meaningful conversation. And you've really put a lot of great context here for us to be able to look at. So anytime that we look at a license plate, you're seeing Auburn Correctional Facility in front view.
Yes, that's absolutely right. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being with us. Listen, we are taking a quick break, and guess what? We'll be right back right after this.
Only 57% of New York City high school students are college ready by their senior year. "55% of high school graduates either have no plans to attend college or are uncertain that they will ever attend. "34% of young adults don't go to college because they can't afford it. Discover what's possible. BronxNet's education programs, internships, and opportunities help engage and inspire Bronx youth and beyond to pursue their passions. Be a part of the BronxNet family. Whether you're interested in our shows, joining a class, or donating to support our mission, visit BronxNet.org to learn more.
19.7% of Bronxites currently experience food insecurity. Meanwhile, instead of these nice, colorful foods, This is the best food that they have access to. If this sounds like you, there are a bunch of resources to get healthy food for free or cheap. If you want to help, you might consider donating or volunteering in one of these places. Community fridges like this one are all over the city and allow New Yorkers to conveniently donate extra food to people who might need it. Go to this link and find your nearest one. Food banks and pop-up events like these provide millions of healthy meals to families in need. These organizations are distributing meals to Bronxites as we speak and are always accepting donations and volunteers.
Welcome back. Over the years, Riverkeeper has played a crucial role in cleaning up the Hudson, restoring it as a part of the a vibrant waterway for boating and fishing and swimming, as well as ensuring safe drinking water for millions of New Yorkers. Now, with a focus on reducing fish kills, protecting drinking water, and enhancing public access to the river, Riverkeeper relies on citizen involvement and expert alliances to address environmental violations. Here now to share their point of view on the matter, I'm joined by the president of Riverkeeper, Tracy Brown. And Tracy, glad to have you.
Thanks for having me. So happy to be here.
Thank you. A lot of great work that goes on and really in making sure that the Hudson River is well taken care of. Talk to me about, if you will, the history here.
Well, Riverkeeper was founded by fishermen in the 1960s. The motivation was the discovery of pollution getting into the fish and really threatening what was then an active fishing industry on the Hudson. And it was before the Clean Water Act was passed. And so it was a bit of an era of free-for-all polluting into the river. And so the fishermen organized to try and stop the pollution and protect their industry and their way of life. And unfortunately, they didn't succeed in that goal. Really kind of the death blow for recreational and commercial fishing in particular on the Hudson was the discovery of the PCB contamination from the General Electric plant. So we don't have really that vibrant commercial fishing anymore, but it did get this movement started. And we're 50 years, almost 60 years into the work now, and we certainly have been bolstered by the Clean Water Act and by increased awareness and investment. And now the Hudson, while we still do have problems with the PCBs, and a lot of other challenges that we're working on. We do have people doing recreational fishing, swimming, boating, and getting more of those benefits that you expect when you live on a beautiful waterway.
Yeah, you kind of like leaned into my next question. But give me the present up-to-date status from your perspective, how you view the Hudson River.
Yeah, so, the Hudson River is this incredibly important linchpin in the whole life flow of the Eastern Seaboard. So the Hudson as an estuary is a basket of life for fish that come out of the Atlantic, come up into the Hudson to spawn. Their young return back to the Atlantic and, are part of that incredible food basket that so many communities beyond ours rely on. So I'd say for me, the most important function of the Hudson is that breathing, living ecosystem that is part of our whole web of life. On that front, I would say that we've got a lot of work to do. I mean, we've had some recovery, but definitely the fish in the Hudson and some of our signature fish are really down in terms of numbers. And there's a lot of pressure both in the Hudson itself and out in the Atlantic from the fishing industry. But there's so many ways to look at the river. It's such a tough question because we really rely on the river to serve so many roles for us: energy, transportation, recreation, food, public, access, cooling now as we look at climate. So there's different measures, I would say, in general. It certainly is no time to ease up on our work in protecting this important estuary river and kind of increasing the awareness of all the ways that it serves us and all the ways that we've impacted its health and its future.
Yeah. For a major portion of my life, I lived on 157th Street and Riverside Drive, directly facing the Hudson River. And I always had the opportunity of looking out, seeing the river, and then seeing New Jersey right on the other side. And I remember conversations that always used to come up with our family that we were always concerned about some of the environmental challenges that really surrounded the Hudson and the efficacy there of the Hudson due to environmental challenges. Talk to me about what you're seeing today by way of environmental challenges. I know we've made some great progress, but the challenges are still present.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So where you were living before, you would have been really close to the wastewater treatment plant there in Harlem.
Yeah.
So one of the big problems that we have, especially in the New York metro area, is sewage. New York City has had the same number of wastewater treatment plants for decades, but certainly not the same number of residents. So when the city was built, there were old technologies that were used where the sewage and the rain from the waters all were designed to go to the plants and get treated together. And in the majority of the city, 60% of the city, the sewage infrastructure still works that way. So every time it rains, rainwater goes into the pipes with the sewage and the wastewater from our buildings and our homes. And it inundates the existing wastewater infrastructure and it bypasses untreated or partially treated, just kind of screened, but not treated for bacteria, this wastewater right into our waterways. So every year right now, New York City residents are dumping, legally dumping, unfortunately, 21 billion with a B gallons of untreated or partially treated sewage into the waterways around New York City. So that is enough sewage to fill the Empire State Building 17 times.
Wow.
So it's a massive volume. And so New York City really needs to add more wastewater treatment capacity. So, just touching on one issue, but that's a big one.
That's a big one. I mean, when you talk about the Empire State Building 17 times, I don't know if you don't come away and say that's not a big one. That's a huge one.
Yeah, and it's crazy that it is acceptable. So we're 50 years into the Clean Water Act. The Clean Water Act promised us swimmable and fishable and drinkable water for everyone in America by 1986. Mm-hmm. And we are not there. And I will say respect to the current New York City Commissioner of the Department of Environmental Protection and the mayor for setting a goal to get rid of these combined sewer overflows by 2060. But really, the only way they're going to get that goal met is by adding more sewage treatment capacity, because the people aren't going away. The rain certainly isn't going away. We're going to have more rainwater than ever. And the current plan that we all need to get behind that is going to get that done is the Renewable Rikers Plan. And that involves closing down Rikers Island and in its place on that property, building a new state-of-the-art wastewater treatment plant, which would also include renewable energy generation technology. And that one project could address both the water pollution issues that, just are at an insane scale, as you're hearing, for the city, but also air pollution issues, because we could get the peaker plant that creates a lot of the air pollution that is driving the illness in the Bronx and elsewhere in the city. So Renewable Rikers is one of our top priorities, getting that project done. Happy to just kind of bring some vision to that. And a lot of people don't realize that in addition to incarceration reform and getting rid of a really terrible prison, whose closure is long overdue, that we will also at the other end get incredible environmental benefits if we can make that project happen.
Yeah, we were just talking in the last segment, don't know if you heard, last segment we just shared a little bit about the Auburn Correctional Facility and just talking about the prison, the negative effect of of incarceration and the prison system in Auburn. We know that talking with you about some of the things that you're talking about, there's a little correlation. But I also want to talk a little bit about pollution enforcement, because that's huge. If we're talking about pollution as being 17 times the Empire State Building, you've got multiple offenders. What are we doing here by way of pollution enforcement? Have things gotten better to really curb the fact that people, take the pollution seriously?
Yeah, so the pollution where we've made the best headway is really industrial pollution from private businesses. That's what the Clean Water Act is designed to get to. We also have made great progress on Superfund cleanup. So Riverkeeper discovered the Exxon oil spill in Newtown Creek, and we're really instrumental in getting that set up as a Superfund site cleanup. We also have been deeply involved in the Superfund site that is the Gowanus Canal and the Hudson River for PCBs. So those kind of big industrial toxic pollution issues are the ones where we've made the most progress. The pollution that's kind of baked into our municipal civic life in the form of wastewater treatment, that's where we haven't been as successful. The state has written a permit, and there's plans for the city to reduce the combined sewer overflows, but not eliminate them. So it's always kind of a mixed story. And then another piece of the puzzle that Riverkeeper is very involved in is protecting the drinking water supply for New York City. The source of the drinking water that comes from upstate from these reservoir systems up in the Catskill area. So that's a whole nother universe of challenges and, I would say, overall success in providing New York City with great drinking water and making sure that continues. But now with climate impacts, there's new stressors and new things to be thinking about. And also on the toxic front, we have the new category of forever chemicals that people are more aware of, the PFAS and PFOS, and looking at those in our drinking water supplies and tackling that. So it is multi-generational work. That's why, like I said, the organization's older than I am, and I know we'll have teams of people here well into the future continuing to do this work for the public.
Yeah. The Hudson River is also home to power plants. And for people who may not be so familiar, talk to us about how many power plants we have along the Hudson and where the challenges lie, because although they're there are some serious situations there.
Yeah. So using the river for energy and then also for waste disposal and kind of outsourcing some of the costs of energy generation. I mean, that's a forever legacy. You could go back to the early days when we were just damming up all the little tributary streams of the Hudson to turn, mills and make paper and grind grain. I mean, we're still dealing with the legacy of over 1,000 abandoned dams from that version of energy generation. And then you go forward to the Indian Point nuclear power plant, which sucked in the Hudson River and used the Hudson River to cool its nuclear reactors. It's what we called once-through cooling. So it was like an incredible fish killing machine to suck in the river and heat it up with all the fish that would come through and the fish eggs that would come through. So that was a huge challenge that had a very negative effect on just the biomass and the life in the Hudson. So we worked hard to get that shut down and decommissioned safely. And now we have the hydropower coming from Quebec. We have the Champlain Hudson Power Express line, which instead of running cables along the highways or existing power cuts, decided it would be cheaper and easier to just run those giant cables through the river. So now we're looking at what's it going to mean to have, the largest extension cord in the world run from Canadian dams all the way down into New York City. So it's, there's always something around power. There's some old plants that we're trying to keep from getting kind of repurposed in the old fossil fuel paradigm and trying to support renewable energy as much as we can, but also wanting to make sure that these new renewable energy infrastructure choices use existing industrial sites, brownfields, power cuts, places where we've already, taken the hit on the ecosystem and don't just kind of go into the river and new ecosystems to expedite the work or make the corporate profit better.
Yeah. Can you give me a little update as to where we stand? I know Indian Point is closed, but yet and still, eyes are still wide open.
Yeah, so getting Indian Point closed was a major campaign of Riverkeepers, and we succeeded in getting that done in 2021. And Indian Point at that point was one of the oldest still operating nuclear power plants in the country. It was having multiple failures. There was substantial radioactive wastewater that came out of leaks in different parts of the cooling infrastructure. And now we have a big radioactive groundwater plume underneath that site that still needs to be fixed. And that is, slowly making its way into the river. So when you have a plant like that, we don't have a federal repository for nuclear materials. So basically every community that has had a nuclear energy plant now basically is looking towards having a permanent nuclear energy waste storage site in its community because there is no place to send that waste. And I think there's an argument to be made that the community that's benefited from the generation of that energy all those years actually should be responsible for the waste that it generates. So that's the phase we're at now, is looking at the site. We have fortunately hit the milestone where the spent fuel rods have been safely contained. So the risks of radioactive disaster happening at that site through an incident is now behind us, which is great. And now we're just looking at that kind of long-term pollution and how we continue to get the site cleaned up. And you might have heard in the news that Holtec, the company that's decommissioning the plant, wanted to just dump into the Hudson wastewater from the spent fuel pools that included tritium. Riverkeeper was very involved in getting a New York State law passed to block that. And we're really happy that passed and the governor signed it, and they're not allowed to just use the Hudson River as a dumping ground for the waste from that plant. But they're now challenging that in court. So it's the bottom line is obviously more important to Holtec than hearing the will of the people who say, we've done all this work to restore this river and you're going to set us back and you're going to hurt our economic recovery and our ecological recovery if you continue to use the Hudson as a dumping ground. So that is an ongoing battle, but those are the type of battles that Riverkeepers kind of built and staffed to fight. So we'll continue to fight and be a voice for keeping this river alive and as clean and accessible as we can.
Yeah. When we talk about the Hudson River, I know there's upstate, there's downstate, but let me go back down to the city for a moment and talk a little bit about that. As we see, numbers are projected that there should be tremendous growth occurring in New York City in the coming years. We know that there's construction going on and an anticipated number of new New Yorkers are expected. What does that mean for you in terms of the Hudson River, and in terms of opportunity, and then also in terms of challenge?
Yeah. So, it's amazing to me that we are willing to just keep adding people and adding toilets and sinks without adding to the wastewater infrastructure capacity. So that disconnect really has to be addressed. That's issue number one. Issue number two, when we look at what's happening with climate and sea level rise, and New York City is going to be one of the places on the planet that experiences the most acute sea level rise, just by way of the narrow rivers that surround the city, the connection to the Atlantic Ocean and the Sound, because sea level rise isn't equal everywhere. So New York City is going to have tremendous sea level rise, and we need to stop building in floodplains. We need to stop filling in wetlands. We need much more protective zoning and development laws in place. It's crazy where we have continued to build right up to the edge of this waterfront. And so people want to be on the waterfront, and then the sea level rise is going to come, the more heavier storms, and all of that new development and the old development that's right up to the waterfront will be vulnerable. And then we're going to be talking about either retreating and pulling back and the wasted effort on those built environments that can't withstand the test of time, or putting up walls to put people behind walls. And people didn't move to the waterfront to be behind a wall. That's not why they want to be there in the first place. So the city really needs to be looking at more climate aware development and zoning, and really being thoughtful about focusing on the high ground areas. And also, there's great concern about people who are in communities that are built over buried rivers, and people who aren't even near the waterfront, but now are finding in major storm events that the water rises up through their basement or through their first floor apartment. So that's a huge concern. So these are some of the challenges that we need to all be really assessing and making the priority in any and all building decisions today going forward.
Yeah, I think public access to the Hudson River has always been a question that's come to mind. I think about right now, there is access from where I used to live. But at times it wasn't always the case. It was a beautiful place to look and see, but it was hard to access. How are you seeing the evolution of public access to the Hudson River now?
So that's a really interesting area of discussion. So, obviously we've gotten, a lot of access on the Manhattan side. One thing that's been happening that's interesting is now the Army Corps of Engineers is coming in with this big plan to address storm surges and flooding for the city, coastal flooding primarily for the city from storms. And this is kind of the follow-up to the disaster of Superstorm Sandy. And the initial plan from the Army Corps was to say, okay, well, where we have public access, we're going to do things like take this park and elevate the park so people can still have the access that they're used to, the environment. But places where communities don't have the public access, for example, in the South Bronx, well, there's no houses there, so let's just kind of raise the walls and raise what we already have in place. But thankfully, there are amazing groups in the Bronx, like the Sustainable South Bronx, the Bronx Council for Environmental Quality, the Bronx River Alliance, who are saying, whoa, this is an opportunity where we're investing in our waterfronts. We have plans. We want waterfront access. We've already organized as a community to say where we want it and how we want it. So let's try and take this kind of unusual opportunity to get some federal dollars to our coastlines and build out what we should have, not just a wall, because a wall is what we have now. Like, let's get our people to the river and make that possible. So that's something that we've been working really hard to amplify those voices and support those voices and those local plans to build in more access as we build in more preparedness. And it all makes logical sense too, because when you think of what's the most flood resilient when flooding does happen, it is a park. It is a basketball court. These are things where waters can come in. People don't live there. It's shared space. It can get wet, and then the water can come out, and those spaces can recover and still function for a community. So we're really hoping that as we look at this investment in sustainability and storm readiness, that there'll be more public space, especially in the Bronx and along the East River, where there isn't as much as we have on the Hudson right now.
Only have a couple of seconds left, but before we go, I just want to have an opportunity to hear from you. Legislatively, what things should the public be paying attention to that maybe can help to, improve the work that you're doing?
Oh boy, that's such a good question. So, the main thing is always first and foremost, the budget and making sure that every year the state is spending money on water infrastructure and for drinking water and recreational water and wastewater. That is so critical, and there's such a huge backlog of work. We just have to keep chipping away and making those investments. And then otherwise, there's the New York Swims Act that we are supporting. That's about getting more people into the water. We made modifications to look to prioritize natural spaces instead of just building pools, make sure that we look at where people can get in the water, where they have access to a river or a lake or a pond. We also are trying to get some legislation passed that would allow stormwater authorities to be set up. This would be a way for the city to get rates to help with stormwater and flooding, where people are incentivized to have more green space on their property and less parking lots and hard space. And that's really critical, because one of the main things about flooding and getting better around reducing flooding is absorbing the rain in place and not just having it bounce off a hard surface into a storm drain and end up in the city with all that sewage that we were talking about at the top of the show. So that's just the quick priorities: water, rainwater, drinking water, wastewater.
Tracy, thank you so much for joining us and sharing today. Great conversation, and we thank you for the efforts that's being done to preserve, maintain the good things along the Hudson River, and Riverkeeper, great work. And so hopefully we'll get a chance to connect soon. And of course, if you ever need to holler to us about what's going on the Hudson, you got a partner and a friend over here.
Thank you so much. It was really great chatting with you. Appreciate it.
Tracy Brown, our guest here. And listen, we come to the end of our show today. Hope that you enjoyed this week's discussion on the Bronx Social Justice Forum. Now, if you're rewatching this week's edition, recatch the cable cast right here on BronxNet.org. If you want to join the conversation, present your point of view, join us and visit our social media at BronxNet TV. Join us next week. We'll continue to elevate the discussion and bring further awareness across the globe. I'm your host, Daren Jaime, saying take care and God bless.